Virgin wife trusted her millionaire husband until she discovered the truth. Welcome to Alcot Stories, where love, betrayal, and redemption come to life. Dear beloved viewers, from the depths of passion to the heights of heartbreak, every story here is crafted with love, emotion, and unforgettable twists just for you. To our new viewers, welcome to a world where love stories are more than just tales. They are experiences that touch the soul. To our loyal subscribers, your support is the heartbeat of this channel. Your love, likes, and comments inspire us to create more stories that move you. If you believe in love, if you believe in second chances, if you believe in the power of emotions, this is your home. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a story that will steal your heart. Like this video if it touched your soul. Comment below your thoughts, your emotions, your favorite moments. We love hearing from you. Share this story with someone who loves deep, emotional storytelling. May your heart always find true love. May your soul never know the pain of betrayal, and may your life be filled with endless blessings. May every broken heart find healing, and every lost love find its way home. Thank you for being a part of Alcot Stories. Now, sit back, relax, and let's dive into another unforgettable journey. Let the story begin. The glass doors of Carter Enterprises slid open with a soft hiss, revealing a grand, ultra-modern lobby that screamed wealth and power. Serena Bennett took a deep breath, gripping the sleek leather handle of her portfolio tighter. This was it, her moment to prove herself. The towering skyscraper, the bustling professionals dressed in sharp suits, and the air of authority surrounding her felt overwhelming. Yet, she straightened her shoulders, her deep brown skin glowing under the bright lights, her confidence a shield against intimidation. Serena had worked tirelessly to build her organic skincare brand, pouring every bit of passion into it. Now she stood at the doorstep of a potential partnership that could change everything. The Carter name was synonymous with success, and landing a deal with them would catapult her business into a whole new league. Unbeknownst to her, Nathaniel Nate Carter, the formidable CEO of Carter Enterprises, had already taken notice. From his expansive office on the top floor, encased in floor-to-ceiling glass, he had a perfect view of the lobby, and what he saw stole his breath away. Serena was unlike any woman who had ever walked into his empire. Her dark eyes held an unshaken determination. Her full lips were untouched by pretension, and her beauty was raw, effortless. A woman like her didn't belong to the elite circles he was used to. A world filled with polished, privileged women who knew nothing of struggle. She was different, and for the first time in years, something inside him stirred. Nate had built his empire on calculated risks and ruthless decisions. But this was not calculated. This was instant, unexplainable attraction. A meeting that changes everything. As Serena walked into the boardroom, the tension was palpable. The executives eyed her with skepticism, her modest attire standing out amongst their tailored suits. But the moment she started speaking, the room fell silent. Her voice was steady, her presentation flawless. She spoke with conviction, her passion for her brand evident in every word. She explained how her products weren't just about beauty, but about self-care, empowerment, and confidence. But while others listened with interest, Nate listened with something else entirely. He wasn't just hearing her words, he was watching her, the way her lips moved, the slight spark in her eyes when she spoke about her dream, the curve of her neck as she turned to display her slides. It was intoxicating. He felt like a man who'd been starving for something real, and suddenly she was standing before him. When the presentation ended, Serena exhaled, relieved. The executives whispered among themselves, exchanging nods. She had done her part. Now, all she could do was wait. Just as she was about to gather her things, a deep, commanding voice interrupted. "Miss Bennet." She turned, startled. Nate Carter himself was standing, his piercing blue eyes locked onto hers. Serena's heart slammed against her ribs. The CEO! She had seen his face in magazines, on Forbes covers, but nothing compared to the sheer presence of the man in real life. He was breathtaking. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a sharp jawline and golden brown hair styled to perfection. He had an air of dominance, but it wasn't just his wealth or power. It was the way he looked at her, like he saw through her. "I'd like to have a word with you," Nate continued, his voice smooth but firm. "Privately." The room fell into a stunned silence. Serena swallowed. "Oh, of course." An unexpected invitation. Moments later, she found herself inside his office, a vast space with floor-to-ceiling windows showcasing the city skyline. Everything about the room screamed power. Black marble floors, sleek furniture, and a massive mahogany desk. But the most intimidating thing in the room was him. Nate leaned against his desk, arms crossed, studying her with an intensity that made her knees weak. "You're impressive," he said finally. "Not just your presentation, you." Serena blinked, caught off guard. "Thank you, Mr. Carter." "Nate," he corrected, a small smirk tugging at his lips. She hesitated. "All right, Nate." A beat of silence passed, thick with tension. "I have a habit of making quick decisions," he mused, his eyes never leaving her face. "And I've decided I'd like to get to know you better." Serena's stomach fluttered. She wasn't naive. She had met men who were intrigued by her beauty before, but none like him. "I appreciate your interest in my business," she said carefully, unsure where this was going. Nate chuckled, shaking his head. "This isn't about business, Serena." Her breath caught. "I'd like to take you for tea," he said smoothly. "Right now." She stiffened. "Tea?" His smirk deepened. "Yes. Tea." Serena's mind raced. Was this really happening? The most powerful man in the room, the CEO, was asking her, an outsider, a brown-skinned woman from a middle-class background, to sit with him privately. It was unheard of. And yet, the way he was looking at her made it clear. He wasn't used to being told no. Her heart pounded. She had come here for business, not whatever this was. But something about Nate drew her in, like a moth to a flame. Against her better judgment, she found herself nodding. I suppose a cup of tea wouldn't hurt. His eyes darkened with satisfaction. "Good," he murmured, stepping closer. Too close. Serena felt the warmth of his body, the slight hint of expensive cologne lingering in the air. And just like that, she knew this meeting was only the beginning. A moment of hesitation. Serena's heart hammered in her chest as she followed Nate Carter through the grand halls of Carter Enterprises. His presence was overwhelming, a man of power, confidence, and wealth. Yet strangely, he made her feel like she belonged. The private lounge they entered was nothing short of luxury. Dim lighting, soft classical music playing in the background, and an elegant tea set arranged perfectly on a marble table. It was not the kind of place she had ever imagined herself in, sitting with a billionaire. She hesitated at the doorway. Maybe this isn't a good idea," she murmured. Nate turned to face her, his piercing blue eyes scanning her expression. "Why not?" Serena swallowed, searching for the right words. "Because this is dangerous. Because you're the kind of man who could break a woman like me. Because this is not my world." But instead she simply said, "Because I came here for business, not personal matters." A slow smile tugged at Nate's lips. "And what if I say, I want both?" Her breath caught. Before she could argue, he gestured toward the plush leather chair. "Sit, Serena. It's just tea." She finally exhaled, lowering herself into the chair. Just tea. But deep down, she knew there was nothing just about this moment. The rich aroma of Earl Grey filled the space as Nate poured their tea, his movements slow and deliberate. He watched her closely, noticing the way her delicate fingers wrapped around the porcelain cup. Her skin was warm brown, a stark contrast against the pristine white china. "You're staring," Serena said without looking up. "I can't help it," Nate admitted, leaning back in his chair. Her pulse quickened. Men had looked at her before, but never like this. Never like she was something to be unraveled, something worth exploring beyond a single glance. She sipped her tea, trying to ignore the electricity in the air. Then he spoke words that made her hands tremble. "I don't just admire your business skills, Serena. I think I'm falling for you." The teacup almost slipped from her grasp. Serena froze, her eyes snapping up to meet his. "What?" Nate held her gaze, completely unaffected by the storm he had just unleashed in her mind. "I mean it," he said, his voice steady, unapologetic. "From the moment I saw you, something changed. And sitting here now, I know I don't want to let this moment pass." Serena's breath was shallow. This couldn't be real. This was Nathaniel Carter, the billionaire CEO, the man who had the world at his feet, and he was telling her that he— "No," she whispered, shaking her head. This doesn't make sense." "Why not?" Nate challenged, leaning forward. "Because—" Her voice wavered. "Because you're rich. Because you're white. Because you're powerful. And I am none of those things." The words felt like an exposed wound. It wasn't self-pity, it was reality. Men like him didn't end up with women like her, not in fairy tales, and certainly not in real life. Nate was silent for a long moment, then leaned in closer, his eyes burning into hers. "Skin color and wealth don't define love. Hearts do." Her world tilted. The words pierced through her doubts, wrapping around the fragile part of her that had always been afraid to believe. Serena wanted to fight it, to tell him that the world didn't work that way, that love wasn't just about feelings, but about reality, about privilege, about power. But when she looked into his eyes, she saw something she hadn't expected. Sincerity. Could he really mean it? Could he truly see beyond the things that society wouldn't? Her throat was dry, her emotions in chaos. "You don't even know me," she said softly, searching his face for a sign of doubt. "I want to," Nate said immediately. "More than I've wanted anything in a long time." Serena's heartbeat roared in her ears. This was madness, and yet the longer she sat there, staring into the eyes of the most unattainable man in the world, the more she realized. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe he was different. The tea between them grew cold, neither of them touching it anymore. The air was thick with undeniable tension, something neither of them could pretend didn't exist. "I should go," Serena finally whispered, breaking the silence. "Don't," Nate murmured, reaching across the table. His fingers barely brushed hers, but the touch sent a wildfire through her veins. She inhaled sharply, her skin burning where he touched her. "This is crazy," she whispered. "Then let's be crazy together," Nate said, his voice rough with desire. Serena felt something dangerous pull at her, a temptation she wasn't sure she could resist. She wasn't naive. Men like him were powerful. Men like him could ruin women like her with nothing more than a careless whisper. And yet here he was, telling her he saw her, that she mattered, that she was worth more than the label society had placed upon her. For a woman who had spent her life being told to stay in her lane, to never reach beyond what was meant for her, this moment felt like standing at the edge of a cliff, staring at the unknown. Would she step back, or would she take the leap? Her body trembled as she slowly stood, Nate's eyes following her every move. "I'll think about it," she whispered, gripping the strap of her purse tightly. A slow, knowing smile curved his lips. "I'll be waiting." Serena turned, forcing herself to walk away, even as her heart begged her to stay. But as she reached the door, she knew one thing with certainty. No matter how hard she tried to resist, Nathaniel Carter had already changed her world, and there was no turning back. Serena never thought she would fall this fast, this deeply. But how could she resist a man like Nathaniel Carter? The first time they met in a private penthouse suite, she felt like she had stepped into another world. Silk sheets, dim candlelight, and a view of the city that stretched for miles. Nate stood by the window, hands in his pockets, looking at her with a hunger that made her pulse stutter. "You came," he murmured, his voice rough with emotion. She swallowed, stepping inside as the door shut behind her. She shouldn't have come. She knew that. But something about Nate pulled her in like gravity, inescapable, intoxicating. And when he finally touched her, brushing his fingers along her cheek, she knew she was already his. Their relationship escalated quickly. Serena had never known a man to be as attentive, as passionate, as completely enthralled by her as Nate was. Every stolen moment was filled with burning kisses, whispered confessions, and nights where he held her so tightly she thought they might become one. But something was missing. Something that should have been there but wasn't. Serena knew love, real love, shouldn't be hidden. Yet Nate never brought her into his world. No public dates, no introductions to friends, no casual outings where they could just be a normal couple. Only luxurious hotel suites, extravagant dinners behind closed doors, and stolen hours in places where no one would see them together. At first, she ignored the red flags. She told herself that he was just private, that he was protecting their love from the media, from the pressure of his status. But deep down, the questions began to whisper in her mind. One evening, after another breathtaking night in his arms, she finally worked up the courage to ask. "Nate," she whispered, tracing circles on his bare chest. His fingers lazily trailed down her spine, making her shiver. "Why don't we ever go anywhere?" His hand stilled. She propped herself up on one elbow, looking at him. His expression had shifted, his blue eyes darkening. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice neutral. "I mean—" She bit her lip, choosing her words carefully. "I don't want to be a secret, Nate." He exhaled, rolling onto his back, staring at the ceiling. "It's not like that." "Then what is it?" A long silence stretched between them. Serena's heart clenched. "Are you ashamed of me?" she finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. His head snapped toward her, shock flashing in his eyes. "Of course not." He sat up, gripping her face in his hands. "Don't ever say that." She searched his expression, looking for the truth. "Then why?" she asked, desperate for an answer. Nate hesitated, and that hesitation was all she needed to see. But when he kissed her again, all the doubts melted away. He whispered her name like it was a prayer, worshipped her body like she was the only woman in the world, and in that moment she let herself believe that this love was real, that she wasn't just a secret, that he truly meant it when he said, "I've never wanted anyone the way I want you." So, she ignored the warning signs. She ignored the fact that he had never once told her he loved her, because in his touch, in his kiss, in the way he looked at her like she was his greatest temptation, she convinced herself it was enough. Days turned into weeks. Weeks turned into months. And Serena fell, hard. She gave him everything, her heart, her body, her trust. She thought, this is my forever. He is my soulmate, and she believed it with every part of her being. What she didn't know was that her love was wrapped in secrets, in lies, in a truth she wasn't ready to face. Because while she was falling in love, Nate was keeping something from her, something that would shatter her world. The evening started like any other, but it would change everything. Serena stood by the hotel suite's floor-to-ceiling window, staring at the dazzling city lights. The skyline stretched endlessly, twinkling under the moon's soft glow. She hugged herself, a small smile playing on her lips. Tonight felt different. It wasn't just another secret meeting. It wasn't just another night of stolen kisses. Tonight, something unspoken lingered in the air. Behind her, the suite door opened, and she turned to see Nate stepping inside, his piercing blue eyes locking onto her. For a moment, he didn't move. He just stood there, taking her in, drinking in every inch of her. And when he finally walked toward her, Serena felt her heartbeat stutter. He reached for her, brushing a loose curl behind her ear. His fingers lingered against her cheek, his touch sending a shiver down her spine. "You're breathtaking," he murmured, his voice husky. Serena's lips parted slightly, but no words came out. She had never seen him like this before, so intense, so vulnerable. "I've never wanted anything as much as I want you," Nate whispered, his forehead resting against hers. His words melted into her skin, igniting something deep within her. She had fought against her feelings for so long, against the fear that this was too good to be true. But tonight, as he held her like she was his entire world, she let go. She let herself believe. Nate's lips met hers, soft at first, almost hesitant. But the moment she responded, the kiss turned into fire. His hands traveled down her back, pulling her closer until there was no space between them. Every touch, every whisper, every slow movement spoke of something more than just passion. It spoke of promises. "I need you," he breathed against her lips, his voice raw. And in that moment, Serena knew she was his. She surrendered, not just her body, but her heart, her trust, her everything. Their clothes disappeared, lost to the night. The world outside ceased to exist. There was only them. And when he whispered, "I've never felt this way before," Serena believed him. She believed every word. Hours later, Serena lay curled against Nate, his arm draped around her possessively. His fingers traced lazy circles on her bare shoulder, his breath warm against her neck. Serena sighed in contentment. "Nate?" she murmured, turning to face him. His eyes were half-lidded, a small, satisfied smile on his lips. "What happens now?" she asked softly. For a second, his expression faltered. Then he cupped her face, kissing her forehead. "Now, we keep making each other happy." Serena's heart swelled. She wanted to believe those words, but something about the way he said them. Something felt off. What Serena didn't know was that while she lay in his arms, dreaming of forever, Nate's past still loomed outside that hotel suite. A life she knew nothing about. A truth that, if revealed, would shatter everything. But tonight, in the warmth of his embrace, Serena didn't know that. She only knew that she loved him, and that, for now, was enough. The smell of sizzling garlic and tomatoes filled the small kitchen as Serena hummed softly, stirring the pot of pasta sauce. Her heart was light, her mind filled with thoughts of Nate. It had been weeks since their most intimate night, and every moment with him since had felt like a dream. She smiled to herself, remembering the way he had held her, how he whispered that he had never felt this way before. A love like theirs had to be real. It had to last. But just as she reached for a plate, a sharp, searing pain shot through her stomach. Serena gasped, gripping the counter for support. The pain came again, stronger this time, a deep, twisting ache that made her knees buckle. Her mother, Margaret Bennet, who had been sitting at the table, immediately rushed to her side. "Serena, what's wrong?" I don't know," Serena panted, pressing a hand to her lower stomach. Something didn't feel right. Margaret's face paled. "That's it. We're going to the hospital, now." Serena wanted to protest, but another wave of pain crashed over her, making the world blur. She had no choice. Something was happening inside her, something she wasn't ready for. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and fresh linen, its bright lights making Serena wince as she was wheeled into the examination room. Margaret clutched her daughter's hand, her worry evident in the tight lines around her mouth. The doctor, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, examined Serena carefully. "How long have you been feeling pain?" she asked. Serena swallowed, her heart pounding. "It just started today. I thought I was fine." The doctor nodded, pressing gently on Serena's abdomen. Her expression shifted slightly. "We'll need to run a few tests," she said. "Please wait here." Serena tried to stay calm, but anxiety gnawed at her. What if something was wrong? Minutes stretched into what felt like an eternity before the doctor returned, a clipboard in hand. She glanced between Serena and Margaret, a small smile forming on her lips. "Congratulations, Miss Bennet," the doctor said. Pregnant." For a moment, Serena's brain refused to process the words. She blinked. "What?" The doctor chuckled. "You're expecting a baby. You're about 6 weeks along." Margaret gasped, covering her mouth. Tears welled up in her eyes. But Serena could only stare. Pregnant? She pressed a shaky hand to her stomach. A life, Nate's child, was growing inside her. A slow warmth spread through her chest, replacing the fear with something else. Excitement, joy, love. She pictured herself holding a tiny baby, Nate's eyes, her smile. A perfect blend of them, proof of their love. A small, breathless laugh escaped her lips. I'm going to be a mother." Margaret reached for her daughter's hands, squeezing them tightly. "My beautiful girl," she whispered. But there was something else in her voice, something that made Serena pause. Margaret wiped at her tears before meeting Serena's gaze. "My love," she began carefully, "I need to ask you something important." Serena frowned. "What is it?" Margaret hesitated, then took a deep breath. "Who is the father of your baby?" Serena's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't told her mother about Nate, hadn't told anyone, but now there was no reason to hide. She straightened her shoulders, her eyes glowing with happiness. "He's wonderful, Mom. He's kind, loving. He's a millionaire CEO." Margaret's expression changed instantly. The warmth in her eyes vanished, replaced by something colder. "Serena," her voice was firm, "rich men don't love like us. They take what they want, and when they're done, they leave." Serena's stomach twisted. "Number Nate isn't like that." Margaret shook her head. Pain flashed in her eyes. "I was your age once, Serena. I was in love once." Her voice trembled, "and I was left with nothing but a broken heart." Serena's breath caught. "You're wrong," she whispered, shaking her head. "Nate loves me." Margaret's eyes filled with sorrow. "My dear, I pray that you're right. But if you're wrong—" She hesitated. "Please don't let him destroy you." Serena refused to listen. Nate wasn't like that. He loved her. Didn't he? Serena couldn't wait to tell Nate. Ignoring her mother's warning, she grabbed her phone and dialed his number, her heart pounding with excitement. After 2 rings, he picked up. "Hey, beautiful," he said, his voice smooth as ever. "What's up?" She took a deep breath, her smile stretching wide. "Nate," she whispered, her voice shaking, "I have the most amazing news." He chuckled. "Oh yeah? What is it?" Serena pressed a hand to her stomach. "I'm pregnant. Nate, we're going to have a baby." Silence. The air grew heavy, suffocating. "Nate?" she asked hesitantly, and then his voice changed. Hard, cold, unrecognizable. "Serena, that's not possible." A chill shot down her spine. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice suddenly weak. A pause, then a cruel laugh. "I think you should check again, sweetheart, because that baby, it's not mine." Her breath stopped. "What?" "I'm sorry, but I'm not the only guy you've been seeing, right?" he said casually, like he was talking about the weather, like he wasn't ripping her heart out. Serena couldn't breathe. Tears blurred her vision. "Nate," she choked out. "What are you saying?" A soft rustling noise came from the other end of the line, a woman's voice laughing in the background. And then, just as she opened her mouth to speak, he ended the call. The silence was deafening. Serena clutched her stomach, her entire world crashing down around her. This wasn't real. It couldn't be real, but it was. Nathaniel Carter, the man she had given everything to, the man she had trusted with her heart, her soul, her body, had just destroyed her with a single phone call. And the worst part, he hadn't even cared. Serena sat frozen, staring at her phone. Nate's last words echoed in her ears like a cruel nightmare. "That baby? It's not mine." Her fingers trembled as she clutched her stomach, as if holding on to the last piece of her shattered dream. How could he say that? How could he deny their child? A sob tore from her throat, her body shaking as silent tears streamed down her cheeks. Her love for him had been real. Hadn't his been too? The thought made her chest tighten painfully. She felt used, discarded, like she had never meant anything to him at all. A fresh wave of nausea rolled through her, not just from the pregnancy, but from the sheer heartbreak consuming her. In that moment, she knew she had to tell her mother, and she dreaded every second of it. Serena stepped out of her bedroom, her legs weak beneath her. Her mother, Margaret Bennett, sat in the living room folding laundry, humming softly. The moment she saw her daughter's swollen, tear-streaked face, her smile disappeared. Margaret's hands stilled over the clothes. "Serena," she said slowly, setting the laundry aside. "What happened?" Serena bit her lip, her heart pounding. She wanted to pretend everything was fine, but it wasn't. It never would be again. Taking a deep breath, she whispered, "Mom, I'm pregnant." Margaret's face didn't show joy. It didn't show excitement. Instead, her eyes filled with sorrow. Serena's heart sank. Why wasn't her mother happy for her? Then, after a long, painful silence, Margaret spoke. "My child, who is the father?" Serena lifted her chin, determination flickering in her wounded gaze. "It's Nate," she said proudly. "Nathaniel Carter. The man I love." Margaret's breath hitched, her eyes darkening with something Serena couldn't quite place. She sat up straighter, gripping the arm of the couch. "Serena, he's a rich man." Serena frowned. "And," Margaret closed her eyes, inhaling sharply, "rich men don't stay, Serena. They take what they want and then they leave." Serena stiffened. "That's not true." Margaret shook her head, her voice trembling. "It is. And you know how I know." She turned her gaze to Serena, eyes filled with years of buried pain. "Because your father was one of them." Serena's breath caught. She had never heard her mother speak of her father. Never. And now there was something raw, something broken in Margaret's voice. Serena's hands clenched. "You never told me about him." Margaret let out a bitter laugh. "Because there was nothing to tell." Her voice turned distant, lost in memories. I was young, just like you. I fell in love with a man who told me all the right things. He was rich, handsome, charming. He made me feel like I was the only woman in his world. Her lips twisted. But when I told him I was pregnant, he vanished. Serena's stomach twisted. Margaret met her daughter's eyes, pain flashing through them like lightning. I waited, Serena. I hoped. I thought maybe he was just scared, that he'd come back. She swallowed hard, but he never did. Serena's pulse pounded. This wasn't the story she had expected. This wasn't the life she had thought her mother had lived. Margaret's voice dropped to a whisper. I had to raise you alone, Serena. I worked day and night. I fought to keep a roof over our heads. And all while he... Her voice broke. While he lived his perfect, lavish life without a second thought about the child he left behind. A single tear slipped down her cheek. I don't want that for you. Serena shook her head violently. No, she whispered, her voice wavering. Margaret's eyes snapped to hers. Serena, no! Serena's voice rose, her chest heaving. She backed away, hands shaking. Nate isn't like that. He's different. He loves me. Margaret watched her daughter with heartbreak in her eyes. Serena wrapped her arms around herself. He told me he doesn't care about race or money. He said people should be judged by their hearts, not their wealth. Her mother's lips pressed into a thin line. Then where is he now? Serena froze. Margaret leaned forward, voice sharp. If he loves you, if he truly meant those words, why are you here crying while he's nowhere to be found? Serena's heart shattered all over again because her mother was right. Nate hadn't fought for her, hadn't asked if she was okay, hadn't even hesitated to abandon her. But still, she wanted to believe. She needed to believe. Maybe he was just shocked, she whispered, desperately grasping for excuses. Margaret's gaze softened, but her words were firm. Or maybe, my love, he was just waiting for an excuse to leave. Serena couldn't take it anymore. Tears poured down her face as she screamed, "You don't know him!" Margaret flinched. "You don't know how much he loves me. You don't know how much I love him." Her mother's face was full of sorrow. "I know what love is, Serena, and love doesn't leave when things get hard." Serena's legs gave out. She collapsed onto the couch, sobbing into her hands. Her mother's arms wrapped around her, holding her as she broke apart. But even through the tears, Serena's heart clung to hope. Nate would come back. He had to, didn't he? The morning sun peeked through the thin curtains of Serena's small bedroom, casting a soft glow across the walls. Serena sat on the edge of her bed, clutching her phone tightly in both hands. Her heart was racing. Her mother's warnings still echoed in her mind, but Serena refused to believe them. Nate wasn't like the man who abandoned her mother. He was different. He had to be. She closed her eyes, imagining the happiness that would fill his voice when she told him the news. Their baby would be the symbol of their love. He would take her into his arms, whisper promises into her ear, and tell her they would be a family. Her lips curved into a hopeful smile. He loves me. He's going to be so happy. With trembling fingers, she dialed Nate's number. The line rang twice before she heard the deep, familiar voice on the other end. "Hey, beautiful." Her heart leaped at the sound. "Nate," she whispered, her voice shaking with excitement. He chuckled softly, unaware of how that one phone call would change both of their lives forever. "You sound nervous," he teased. "What's up, baby?" Serena took a deep breath, pressing her free hand to her stomach. This is the moment. "I have the best news," she said, her voice light and full of emotion. "Oh, yeah?" he replied, his voice playful. "What's that?" Serena's eyes welled up with happy tears. "I'm pregnant." There was silence on the line. Serena's heart thudded in her chest. She waited, expecting him to laugh in joy or whisper how much he loved her. But the silence stretched on too long. "Nate," she whispered, her smile starting to fade. His breath crackled through the phone, but there was no happiness in it. Finally his voice came, cold, sharp, and so unfamiliar it made her blood freeze. "You must be mistaken." Serena's smile died instantly. Her whole body went still. "What?" she whispered, her heart squeezing painfully. Nate's voice was harder now, like steel cutting through the air. "That baby, it's not mine." It felt like someone had punched her in the chest. Her hand gripped the edge of the bed as her stomach twisted violently. "What? What are you saying?" "I'm saying," he snapped, "that I'm not the only man you've been with." Serena's heart stopped. Her breath caught in her throat, leaving her unable to speak. How could he say that? He was the only man she had ever loved, the only man she had ever given herself to. "Nate, how can you say that?" She choked out, tears pooling in her eyes. His cold laugh cut through her like a knife. "Come on, Serena. You're a beautiful girl. Do you really expect me to believe you've only been with me?" Her whole world began to collapse around her. Serena's hand trembled against her stomach, protecting the tiny life growing inside her. "This is your baby, Nate," she whispered desperately. "I've never been with anyone else. You know that." But there was no warmth left in his voice. "I don't know anything," he spat. Her heart broke into a million pieces. The man who had once held her like she was the most precious thing in the world, the man who'd whispered promises into her skin, now spoke to her like she was nothing. "Nate, please," she sobbed. But his cold voice sliced through her once more. "Forget my number, Serena." Her breath caught in her throat. "Don't ever contact me again." And then the line went dead. Serena stared at the phone, her mind struggling to understand what had just happened. For a moment, everything was silent. Then the pain hit her, so raw, so deep, like her heart had been ripped from her chest. "No," she whimpered, shaking her head. Tears blurred her vision as she redialed his number with shaking fingers. Voicemail. She called again. Voicemail. Again. Voicemail. "Please. Nate, please." Her sobs filled the room, breaking into sharp, painful gasps. Her entire body trembled as she collapsed to the floor, clutching her stomach. The door creaked open, and Margaret rushed inside, her face pale with worry. "Serena." Serena couldn't speak. She could only cry, rivers of tears pouring down her face. Her mother knelt beside her, pulling her into her arms. "Mama! He left me," Serena sobbed, clutching her mother's dress like a little girl. Margaret's heart broke at the sight of her daughter's pain. She had seen this before. History was repeating itself. "My poor baby," Margaret whispered, stroking Serena's hair. "I tried to warn you." Serena's body shook with each sob, her mother's words echoing in her mind. "Rich men don't stay. They take, and then they leave." Just like her father. Just like Nate. She had been so certain, so blind in her love, believing he was different. But now, she saw the truth. He had never loved her. He had only wanted her body, nothing more. The life growing inside her was just an accident to him. Hours passed, but Serena's tears didn't stop. Her heart was completely shattered. Everything she had dreamed about, her future with Nate, their perfect little family, had been nothing but a lie. The man she had trusted with her body, with her heart, with her future, had thrown her away like she was nothing. As the sun began to rise, Serena's sobs slowly faded into silence. She lay in her mother's arms, her eyes red and swollen. But something inside her was changing. A new emotion began to bloom beneath the pain, but for herself, for trusting him, for believing in him, for giving him everything only to be left with nothing. The city skyline shimmered outside the floor-to-ceiling windows of the luxurious penthouse. Inside, the atmosphere was warm, filled with the scent of expensive wine and burning vanilla candles. Soft jazz music played in the background, but the real melody was the sound of hushed whispers and quiet laughter. Nathaniel Nate Carter lay sprawled on the velvet couch, his crisp white shirt slightly unbuttoned, revealing the chiseled muscles beneath. His arm lazily draped around Lily Whitmore, a stunning woman with long platinum blonde hair and piercing blue eyes. She traced her manicured fingers down his chest, smirking. "You seem distracted, babe," she murmured, her lips brushing his jaw. Nate exhaled slowly, rolling his shoulders. "Just business," he lied, shifting his gaze to the ceiling. But before he could drown in the illusion of pleasure, his phone rang. Serena's name flashing across the screen. Lily's smirk widened. "Your little secret calling?" she teased, her voice laced with amusement. Nate hesitated, but then, with a lazy chuckle, he put the phone on speaker. On the other end, Serena's voice was trembling. "My love, I have the best news," she said, breathless with excitement. Nate's grip on the glass of whiskey tightened slightly. "What's that?" he asked, forcing nonchalance into his tone. But the next word shattered any illusion of control. "I'm pregnant." Silence filled the penthouse. Lily's eyebrows shot up in amusement, her nails slowly dragging against Nate's collarbone. "Oh, this just got interesting," she whispered. Nate's face darkened. This wasn't part of the plan. This wasn't supposed to happen. He never intended to let things go this far. His pulse quickened, but his voice turned cold. "You must be mistaken," he said, his words slicing through the air. The pain in Serena's voice was immediate. "Nate, what are you saying?" she whispered, his jaw clenched. Lily leaned in, resting her chin on his shoulder, mocking Serena's desperation. "Oh, come on, Nate," Lily purred. "Tell her the truth." And with one final, ruthless breath, he spat out the words that destroyed Serena completely. "That baby isn't mine." The silence that followed was deafening. Serena's breath hitched. The woman who had trusted him, loved him, given him everything, was now "Nate, please don't do this," she sobbed, her voice breaking, but his expression was blank. Without hesitation, he delivered the final blow. "Don't ever contact me again." And with that, he hung up. Lily burst into laughter, taking a sip of wine. "Damn, Nate," she purred. "You didn't even hesitate." He exhaled deeply, tossing his phone onto the couch. Had to be done. Lily swung her legs over his lap, straddling him. She trailed her fingers down his jaw, tilting his chin so he could look into her icy blue eyes. "No guilt?" she whispered. Nate hesitated, but only for a second. "She'll move on," he muttered. She knew what this was. Lily smirked. "Good," she whispered, pressing her lips against his. "Because tonight, you're mine." And as Nate pulled Lily closer, letting the heat of the moment consume him, he pushed all thoughts of Serena away. Or at least, he tried. Serena sat frozen, still clutching her phone. Her ears rang with silence. Her whole body felt numb, as if someone had ripped her heart out and left her bleeding in the cold. Tears streamed down her cheeks as the reality of what had just happened settled deep into her bones. He had never loved her. He had never been serious about her. Everything, the romance, the whispered promises, the nights filled with passion, had all been a lie. Her mother's words came crashing back. "Rich men don't stay. They take, and then they leave." Serena let out a sharp, broken gasp, gripping her stomach protectively. She wasn't just heartbroken, she was shattered. And worst of all, she was carrying the child of the man who had just thrown her away. The betrayal was complete. The man she had loved with all her heart had just become her greatest heartbreak. Serena collapsed to the floor, her fingers gripping the cold wooden surface, as if it were the only thing keeping her from falling apart completely. Her phone slipped from her trembling hands, landing with a soft thud. The call was over, but the damage was permanent. The man she loved, the man she trusted, had just erased her from his life like she was nothing. Her chest rose and fell rapidly, struggling to breathe through the unbearable weight of betrayal. Tears streamed down her cheeks, her body shaking violently. "No, this can't be happening," she whispered, her voice barely audible. The words he had spoken replayed in her mind, each syllable cutting deeper than a blade. "That baby isn't mine. Don't ever contact me again." The warmth of his touch, the whispered "I love yous" in the dark, the way he held her after their nights together. Was all of it a lie? Her stomach twisted painfully. She'd given him everything, and he had thrown her away. Margaret Bennett stood by the doorway, watching her daughter crumble. Her heart ached, but not with surprise. This was exactly what she had feared. Slowly, she moved towards Serena, kneeling beside her broken form. She reached out, brushing the damp strands of hair from her daughter's tear-streaked face. "Now you see the truth," she murmured, her voice heavy with sorrow. Serena shook her head violently, sobbing harder. "No! He loves me, Mama. I know he does." Her mother's lips pressed into a thin line. "If he loved you, he wouldn't have done this." Serena let out a broken, guttural sob. She wanted to deny it. She wanted to believe that this was just a misunderstanding, that he would call her back and say it was all a mistake. But deep down, a dark realization clawed at her chest. It was never real. None of it was. Serena wrapped her arms around herself, rocking back and forth as if that could keep the pieces of her shattered heart together. Her mother pulled her into an embrace, holding her as if she were still a child. But no hug, no warmth, could erase the agony inside her. Margaret's voice was soft but firm. "Men like him, they take what they want and leave, just like your father did to me." Serena squeezed her eyes shut. She had refused to listen before. She had defended Nate, convinced he was different, convinced that their love was real. And now, she was paying the price for her blind trust. The room felt suffocatingly silent, except for Serena's soft, choked sobs. Her phone still lay on the floor beside her. For a brief second she stared at the screen. Half of her still hoped it would light up with his name, that he would call, that he would take it all back, that he would say, "I was wrong. I love you. I want you and our baby." But the phone stayed dark. The silence screamed louder than any words ever could. Nate wasn't coming back. Serena buried her face in her hands, and for the first time in her life, she realized what it meant to be completely, utterly alone. Margaret sighed, stroking Serena's back. "You have to be strong now, my love. Not for him, not even for yourself, but for your child." Serena's breath hitched. Her child, the only piece of Nate she had left. Her heart clenched. How could she love the baby when its father had abandoned her like this? Would she look into her child's eyes and see Nate's betrayal staring back at her? Would she ever be able to look at her son or daughter without remembering the cruel man who walked away? A deep, burning resentment took root inside her, not just toward Nate, but toward the love she had foolishly believed in. Love was a lie, and she would never trust it again. Serena vanished. She erased herself from Nate's life as if she had never existed. No calls, no messages, no desperate pleas for him to change his mind. She was gone, and she intended to keep it that way. She deleted his number, blocked him on every platform, and buried his name deep within her heart, not as a memory, but as a lesson. For the first few days, she lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling as if her soul had been ripped apart. But then, something inside her changed. She refused to be a victim. She refused to let a man like Nate define her life. She refused to let his betrayal destroy her. So, Serena made a choice. She would raise this child on her own. No father, no heartbreak, just her and the baby. And she would make sure her child never knew the pain of being abandoned, not like she had. Meanwhile, Nathaniel Carter felt free, or at least, that's what he told himself. He had escaped the trap of fatherhood, of commitment, of responsibility, and he was living life exactly the way he wanted, fast, indulgent, and reckless. He threw himself into his work, closing million-dollar deals with a single handshake. At night, he surrounded himself with beautiful women, luxury, and alcohol. Lily Whitmore was always by his side, her flawless white skin and seductive laughter a constant distraction from the nagging thoughts at the back of his mind. Every night was a new thrill, a different woman, a different bed. But as the weeks turned into months, something inside him began to shift. At first, he ignored it, but then it started eating at him. It was the little things that haunted him first, a scent in the air that reminded him of her, a soft laugh from across the room that sounded like hers, the way the sheets in his bed felt too cold without her warmth beside him. He'd wake up in the middle of the night reaching out, only to find emptiness. The realization would hit him like a punch to the gut. Serena wasn't there, and she never would be again. He told himself he didn't care, that she had just been another woman. But if that were true, why did he keep thinking about her? Why did her absence feel so heavy? Why, when he closed his eyes, was it her face he saw? One evening, while attending an extravagant gala, Nate found himself standing by the bar, swirling a glass of whiskey in his hand. Lily leaned against him, her red dress hugging her curves as she whispered something flirtatious in his ear. But he wasn't listening. His gaze was fixed on a couple across the room. The woman had dark skin, just like Serena's. She was laughing, glowing with happiness as the man beside her touched her gently, protectively. Nate's chest tightened. His mind flashed back to the night he had whispered empty promises to Serena under dim hotel lights, to the way she had trusted him, to the way she had looked at him like he was her entire world. His jaw clenched. Lily's fingers traced his arm, pulling him back to reality. "Come on, Nate. Let's dance." He turned to her, forcing a smirk, but the drink in his hand suddenly felt bitter, and the woman in his arms felt wrong. Days passed, then weeks, then months, and the gnawing sensation in Nate's chest only grew worse. His nights became restless. The luxury surrounding him, the women, the money, the meaningless pleasure started to feel empty, hollow, like something was missing, like someone was missing. One evening, as he sat alone in his penthouse, staring out over the city skyline, the truth crashed over him like a tidal wave. He had made the biggest mistake of his life. He had let go of the only woman who had ever truly loved him, and he had done it without a second thought. Now he was left with nothing but regret. But was it too late to fix what he had broken? Nathaniel Carter sat alone in his penthouse, a glass of whiskey in his hand, staring at the city lights. The skyline stretched endlessly, but all he saw was emptiness. It had been months since Serena had vanished from his life, months since he had cruelly denied their child and turned his back on the only woman who had ever loved him. And now, He was haunted. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't forget her. He had buried himself in work, closed deals worth millions, surrounded himself with beautiful women, but none of it filled the void she had left behind. Every night when he returned home, the silence was deafening. Every hotel room felt lifeless. Every kiss from another woman felt meaningless. And the worst part? He had no one to blame but himself. That night, as the city pulsed with life below him, Nate stood in front of the mirror in his bedroom. The reflection staring back at him was unrecognizable. Dark circles lined his eyes. His once proud smirk was gone, and for the first time in years, he hated the man looking back at him. "Who the hell have I become?" he whispered. He had always prided himself on being a man of control, of power. But now, he was just a hollow shell, a man drowning in his own mistakes. His grip tightened around the whiskey glass. Then, without warning, he hurled it across the room. It shattered against the wall, fragments scattering across the marble floor, just like his life, just like Serena's heart. He tried to forget her, but she was everywhere. In the scent of vanilla and jasmine that lingered in his sheets, in the warmth of the morning sun that once illuminated her sleeping face beside him, in the way the ocean waves crashed against the shore, just like the night he had traced his fingers down her spine as they lay together, tangled in passion. But what haunted him the most was her laughter. He used to love how it filled the silence, how it made his world brighter. Now, that silence was unbearable, and her absence, it was killing him. One evening, Nate found himself at a high-profile gala, surrounded by luxury and indulgence. Lily Whitmore stood by his side, draped in an expensive red gown, looking as stunning as ever. She ran her fingers down his chest, whispering, "You're distracted tonight, Nate." He forced a smirk. "Am I?" She leaned in closer, her lips grazing his ear. "Let me take your mind off whatever's bothering you." He let her pull him onto the dance floor, her body pressing against his. But as the music swayed around them, all he could think about was Serena. The way she used to fit so perfectly in his arms, the way her eyes sparkled when he whispered in her ear. His heart clenched. For the first time in his life, he didn't want this. He didn't want Lily. He didn't want this empty, meaningless game. He wanted Serena, but he had already lost her. That night, as Nate drove home, rain poured against his windshield, mirroring the storm raging inside him. His hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, his mind racing. He could have had everything with Serena, a family, a love that was real, but he had thrown it all away. And for what? For nothing. As he pulled into his penthouse driveway, he sat in the car for a long time, staring ahead. For months, he had ignored the truth. But now, there was no denying it. He had made the biggest mistake of his life, and it was time to face it. Nathaniel Carter had always believed that money and power could fix anything, but no amount of wealth could undo what he had done to Serena. For weeks, he had tried to push her from his mind. He had drowned himself in business meetings. He had surrounded himself with the finest luxuries, the most beautiful women. But nothing could erase the memory of her voice the night he shattered her world. "You're going to be a father." That moment had replayed in his mind over and over again, each time stabbing deeper into his soul. At first, he had convinced himself that it was just another fling, that she would move on, just like every other woman before her. But Serena was not like the others. She had never wanted his money. She had never wanted his fame. She had only wanted him, and he had thrown her away. Now, he needed to find her. He needed to know if she was okay, if their child was okay. But deep down, he feared what he would find. Because after everything, why would she ever forgive him? Nate sat in his office, his fingers drumming against his desk as he stared at the man across from him, James Holloway, a private investigator. "Tell me you found her," Nate demanded, his voice sharp with desperation. James nodded, placing a folder on the desk. "She's been living in a small coastal town, about 2 hours from the city." Nate's pulse quickened as he flipped open the file. And then his breath caught. There she was, Serena. She was walking through a quiet marketplace, wearing a simple sundress that clung to her body. Her belly was round, full, pregnant, with his child. But what shook him the most was how happy she looked. There was a glow about her, one he had never seen before. She was smiling, laughing softly as she touched her stomach. She looked at peace, and that was when Nate realized the truth. She had moved on, without him. Nate leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair. The image of Serena, radiant and strong, burned into his mind. For the first time in his life, he had no power, no control. She didn't need him. Not anymore. "Do you want me to approach her?" James asked. Nate hesitated. Every fiber of his being was screaming yes. He wanted to see her, to hear her voice again, to tell her he was sorry. But would it even matter? Would she even listen? Nate closed the file. "No," he said, "I'll do it myself." Because if he wanted a second chance, he would have to earn it. The next morning, Nate got into his car and drove. Every mile that passed felt like a lifetime. With each turn, his heart pounded harder. What if she refused to see him? What if she had someone else now? What if she had truly stopped loving him? By the time he arrived in the quiet town, the sun was setting. He parked outside a small cafe, scanning the streets, and then he saw her. Standing by the ocean, the wind lifting her dark hair. One hand rested on her belly, a soft, contented look on her face. Nate's chest tightened. For months, he had been haunted by regrets. Now, he was finally here. But as he took a step forward, Serena turned. And when their eyes met, there was no warmth, no trace of the love that had once burned between them, only cold, hardened indifference. And for the first time, Nate realized she might never let him back in. Nathaniel Carter had always been a man of control. He had built an empire from nothing. He had commanded boardrooms with a single look. Women had chased after him, desperate for even a fraction of his attention. But here he was now, on his knees, stripped of power, stripped of pride, stripped of everything except regret. "I was a coward. I was selfish. I love you, Serena." His voice cracked, raw with desperation. The wind howled around them, the ocean crashing against the shore in the distance. But the storm wasn't in the sky. It was in her eyes. Serena stood before him, unmoving, cold, unrecognizable. The woman who had once melted in his arms now looked at him as if he were a stranger. And maybe, after what he had done, that's exactly what he was. Serena clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms. She had imagined this moment 1,000 times, but never like this, never with Nate on his knees begging. She had pictured him in his cold penthouse, wrapped around another woman, living his life as if she had never existed. And now, months later, he was here, pleading for a second chance. Her breath hitched as memories flooded back, the nights spent in his arms, the whispered promises, the moment she told him she was pregnant, and his cold, heartless words in return, "You must be mistaken. That baby isn't mine." A fresh wave of pain crashed over her. She wrapped her arms around her belly instinctively, protectively. Nate noticed, and his face crumbled. "Serena." "Please," he whispered, but she shook her head, her voice as sharp as a blade. "You threw me away when I needed you the most." Nate flinched as if she had struck him, but Serena wasn't done. She took a step forward, her dark eyes burning with unshed tears. "You don't deserve this, child." Those words shattered him. He had spent months drowning in regret, months thinking about what he had lost, but hearing those words made it real, made it permanent. He reached out, but she stepped back. "Please," he rasped, "give me one chance to make this right." Serena turned away, staring at the horizon. For months, she had dreamed of Nate regretting, of him hurting. But now that it was happening, why did it feel so empty? She had loved him, with everything she had, and he had thrown it all away like it was nothing. She couldn't trust him, not again, not after the way he had crushed her. She took a deep breath before speaking. Her voice was steady, cold. "You want a second chance, Nate?" He nodded frantically, hope flickering in his blue eyes. But then her next words destroyed him. "You'll never have one." Nate felt something inside him break. Serena turned to leave, her decision made. But just as she took a step forward, he grabbed her wrist. She gasped, jerking away, but his grip wasn't rough, it was desperate. His voice cracked as he spoke. "Don't do this, Serena! Don't walk away!" She stared at him, tears pooling in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall, because if she cried for him again, it meant he still had power over her, and she had vowed to never let that happen again. "You walked away first, Nate." "I know," he choked out, "and it was the worst mistake of my life." Silence stretched between them, the weight of everything too heavy to bear. But finally, Serena took a breath, and she let go. "Goodbye, Nate." And this time she meant it. Nathaniel Carter had built his life on winning. He had won in business, won in power, won in wealth. But this time he lost. And it wasn't just a loss. It was destruction. As Serena walked away, her silhouette fading into the golden light of the setting sun, Nate felt something inside him shatter. This wasn't just regret. This was punishment, the ultimate punishment. He had spent months believing he could fix this, that one apology would erase his sins. But Serena had proved him wrong. Some things couldn't be undone. Some betrayals were permanent. He stood frozen, watching her disappear. His knees threatened to buckle, but he refused to fall. Not yet. Because deep down, he still hoped she would turn back. Even if just for a second, even if just to hesitate. But she never did. She never even glanced over her shoulder, and that was when he knew. This was real. She was gone. Forever. Nate swallowed hard, his throat raw, his chest aching. For the first time in his life, he felt powerless. His money meant nothing. His name meant nothing. His charm, his influence, none of it could bring her back. And that was the greatest punishment of all. That night, Nate sat in his penthouse, drowning in his own silence. The city lights stretched out before him, but they felt meaningless. He'd been here before, alone, but it had never felt like this. It had never felt like a prison. Every corner of the room reminded him of Serena, the way she had laughed when he teased her, the way she had melted when he touched her, the way she had loved him without conditions, and the way he had thrown her away like she was nothing. Nate clenched his fists, his chest tightening. He had been blind. So blind. He had believed Serena was just another woman, another name on his long list of conquests, but she wasn't. She was the one. And now she was carrying his child. A child he would never know, a family he had destroyed with his own hands. Nate ran a hand through his hair, frustration burning beneath his skin. What had he done? What kind of man betrays the woman who loves him? What kind of man abandons his own child? He had thought he was in control, that he could walk away without consequences. But now he realized the truth. He hadn't just lost Serena. He had lost everything, the life he could have had, the love he had taken for granted, the family he had foolishly thrown away. And now he would spend every day paying the price, watching from a distance, knowing his child would grow up without him, knowing Serena would move on, finding happiness with someone better, and knowing, without a doubt, that he would never, ever be whole again. Time passed, days turned to weeks, weeks turned to months. And yet Nate's regret never faded. He saw Serena once, by accident. She was walking down the street, her belly round with pregnancy, her face radiant. She was smiling, happy, and it wasn't because of him. It was despite him. Nate wanted to call out to her, to tell her he was sorry, to beg her to let him in, but she never even looked his way, as if he didn't exist. And that was the ultimate punishment, because now Nathaniel Carter would live the rest of his life knowing he had once held the most precious thing in the world, and he had let it slip through his fingers.